I am Iron Man.
You serious?
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another review. I know it's been a while since we've actually filmed one, now that I think about it, but this was a review I really wanted to get out to you guys as soon as possible, and the show did just end. So today I'm going to be talking about the newest MCU show, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Now, that being said, this is a show that did just finish as of me filming this review, so it's going to be a massive spoiler warning right here. I do highly recommend you go and watch this show first before watching this. So please go watch that show, come back, or if you don't care about spoilers, then feel free to stick around and let's do this. One of the first things I want to talk about when it comes to this show is really one of the biggest talking points, which is the animation. Now I get it, the animation's not the best looking thing in the world. It's not something that everyone's gonna look at and think, oh, I like this, which hasn't been happening. A lot of the criticisms do come from the animation and the fact that not a lot of people are liking it. That being said, I personally do not mind it, but I also don't love it either. It is one of the main things that does hold this show back for me in terms of being my all-time favorite Spider-Man show. But that being said, I think the style of it is actually a really good idea. I like the idea of it being kind of a 3D cel-shaded style, very reminiscent of some of the older comics. But it is probably my least favorite part of the show, just by comparison. But I don't hate it either. I think another point in where the show is at its weakest is actually in the very beginning of the show, with the first half of the first episode. I personally don't love this show's telling of the origin story, but over time, especially with something that happens in the last episode, it actually makes me appreciate this a little bit more. To where it's still my least favorite part of the show, but the final episode actually made it to where I actually don't mind it anywhere near as much as I used to. Which, I never hated it before, but it's always been that one part of the show where I was always, I don't know how much I rock with this version of the origin, and I still really don't to an extent, but I appreciate it a lot more. I mean, aside from that, once the second half of the first episode hits is really where the show starts to really pique my interest, when we immediately skip past all of him learning how to use his powers. He gets bitten by the spider, and then we cut forward where he's immediately used to being Spider-Man and stopping different crimes, which I really appreciate, because it really feels like this show understands its characters and respects them, to where everybody in this show feels like just a well-written character. There was not a single character in this show that I disliked. And jumping around from some standout characters for me, I'm not going to talk about everybody, but there are a few I want to talk about. The main two I want to talk about, we'll start with one of them, is Peter. This version of Peter Parker genuinely surprised me more than I thought. Obviously, there's all the controversies with the voice actor and some stuff he said before the show came out. I'm not going to get into that, just because I'm not judging my feelings on the show at that point, or the character. So, if you guys have feelings about it, obviously that's fine. I'm personally just judging the character as it is, and judging the performance as it is. And that being said, I think that the voice actor Hudson Thames gave a really good performance. It's not the best voice for Spider-Man, but it was still a pretty solid voice for the character. And I think that the writing for Peter, this really felt like Spider-Man to me. From some of the talks that he's had with different characters throughout the show, one of the main ones for me being with Norman in the third episode, really showed that even though he had a pretty different origin, and that they still talk about Uncle Ben, but Uncle Ben didn't really have any effect on him being Spider-Man, because by the time that Uncle Ben died, he hadn't been bitten by the spider yet. But you still see how much of an impact Uncle Ben still had on him, and how much he truly understands the weight of the choice that he's made for becoming Spider-Man. And that's just something that I really appreciated for this version of Peter, and it was just something that I feel like we didn't really get to see in Tom Holland's movies, which I don't want to do too many comparisons to the MCU, but that being said, this show was very clearly supposed to be an origin for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and that really shows in a lot of the story beats that are still kept in there. There are still the Sokovia Accords. There are still some kind of similar beats to certain stories. I mean, in the end of the first episode, they recreate almost shot for shot the scene when we first see Peter in Civil War. So you can tell that they still kept some beats of wanting to have this be originally a Tom Holland origin story, until they kind of just decided to change it and make it its own thing, which, I gotta be completely honest, I really greatly prefer. And I already talked a little bit about Norman, but I'll actually get into him next. He was another standout character for me. This version was one that really surprised me. I was pretty confident going into the show that I was going to like Norman just because of the actor who was behind the character, but I didn't really expect to like Norman as much as I do. Throughout the beginning of the show, it kind of gives you that vibe of, oh, you really don't want him to become the Goblin in the future because he has such a great relationship with Peter. But then at the end of the show, they kind of started to give a few little vibes, and even throughout parts of the earlier in the show, primarily when it came to finding Otto, you kind of started to see the classic Norman Osborn slipping out just a little bit. And by the end of the show, they're definitely kind of showing that he might actually become the Goblin within the next couple seasons. I'm personally expecting it to happen maybe in season 3. Just because of some of the stories they've set up for season 2, I think it would be best to save Goblin for a 3rd season if they were to do it. Because the beginning I was thinking, oh, I kind of don't want him to become Goblin, and then the stuff he does later on has me thinking, oh, they're going to do this with some of his attitude in certain situations. So, that being said, I really do love this version of Norman. He's become one of my favorite versions of the character, and I'm very excited to see what's going to happen with him in future seasons. The other standout character I really wanted to talk about who really surprised me, and I was not expecting to like anywhere near as much as I do, is Lonnie. He really felt like a split main character between him and Peter. You get so much for this version of Lonnie, to where he's the star quarterback, he's essentially the king of the school at the beginning. And then when you hit that episode where he essentially has to trade himself up for his little brother and join the 1/10 to keep his brother safe, which kind of ends up dooming him in the process, is really interesting stuff. And then when you get to later on in the show where you start to see him kind of embrace that a little bit more, where he actually kind of likes being in the 1/10. And then when you get to the end of the show and he gets his Tombstone-like abilities where he's just not able to be harmed, really goes to show you the fact that he's pretty much completely fallen off the deep end in terms of he wants to still help people. He helped Spider-Man. He's still clearly a good guy, but he's fallen in so deep with this gang that when that final shot of him is him throwing away his Letterman jacket in the trash, shows what happened to him where he was at the start and where he's ended up, where it really makes you kind of feel bad for him, but at the same time, you're still not only invested in him, but you still like him because he's shown no sign of being a bad person, which has me really interested in how they're going to take his character in the future seasons, because they showed some hints of him maybe looking a little bit more like the comics, but even if he doesn't, he got the name Tombstone around the middle of the show, and now he's got those abilities of Tombstone. So, he is already that character. Now it's just going to be a matter of what's he going to do now that he is the head of the 110, since the original head said, no, I'm done, I'm out, when Scorpion nearly killed him. So, it really has me intrigued on what they're going to do with him later, because he was dang near my favorite character in the show, and I feel like a lot of people can say that because of how well written he was. I'm not going to talk about too many of the other side characters just because there are a lot of characters to talk about, but a couple of the other ones for me, I really liked Nico and Harry as well. It was so nice to have another version of Harry that I actually like. I'd said previously in the past I really only like 2 or 3 versions of Harry, which would be Insomniac, the 2003 show, and then James Franco. Every other version of Harry I really don't like that much. So it was nice to have, especially in the shows, because I hate Harry in Spectacular. I know I praised that show, but I really do not like Harry. I don't remember enough of that Harry from the 90s show. I do need to rewatch that. but there's just not that many versions of Harry that I like, especially when it comes to shows. There was really only the 2003 show, so it was nice to have this be another version of Harry that I like, because he just seems like the kind of person where I can believe that he and Peter are friends. And then even with Nico, I didn't expect to really think much of her character either, and then she also surprised me with just being a really likable character. And then at the very end, towards the second half of the show, when she figures out Peter is Spider-Man, and she doesn't know what to think about it, and then she doesn't even have the best relationship with Harry at the beginning, just because she kind of writes him off as, oh, he's just a rich boy, he doesn't really care. And then when she has some big moments with Harry, it really starts to kind of change her perception of him. And then, even with forgiving Peter in the second to last episode, it made me really like her character, and I'm really glad that they just brought her in and even kind of set up a few parts throughout the show with her having her magic abilities. It's another thing that has me really intrigued by what's going to happen later on in the show with the next couple seasons, which I think they're probably going to explore a little more of that when season 2 comes around, which I am very much excited for. And like I mentioned earlier, this show does still follow some very similar beats to the MCU, not just with taking place primarily during Civil War and seeing that there was the airport fight in Germany and that the Sokovia Accords are going on. That's a big thing going on during the entire show. And not only that, there are also appearing Marvel characters. The first one being Doctor Strange at the very beginning, which again felt a little random to me. And it was a part of the origin I didn't like, because I was thinking, oh, this spider just kind of came out of nowhere, why is it here? But then Doctor Strange shows up at the very end, and then the way they talk to him, they're going, oh, you're the guy who destroyed the skull. And Strange is in the mindset of, what are they talking about? And then they pull a really interesting twist with having that symbiote who appeared in the first episode come through a portal that Osborn made, where he kind of used the tech of the other interns without them knowing, which is what really kind of puts Norman in a very tricky position, which leads Peter to want to show that he's kind of split off from Norman and that he's making his own company, which I really like that they did with that, but I really liked how they pulled off the turning the origin around a little bit with making you think you knew what happened in the first episode, but then kind of flipping that on its head. With Norman opening this portal, the symbiote comes through that, and then the symbiote fighting Strange causes the symbiote to kind of mess with the time zone a little bit, and that's how they end up at Midtown. And because of an earlier episode where Scorpion nearly killed Spider-Man, and they had to take him to the medical wing in Oscorp, you see them take a blood sample, they put that into a spider, and that's the spider that falls through that portal that jumps on to bite Peter. So it's kind of a wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey kind of thing. But it was actually something that it actually made sense to me, because it had me go, oh, so that's why Strange acts like, oh, we're not supposed to be here. This is why the spider ended up there. It wasn't a multiverse thing, it was just a lot of time travel involved, which, again, I still don't love the origin for this version of Peter, but the final episode made me respect it a lot more and actually incorporated Doctor Strange in a really interesting way, which I know Jonah would pretty much be happy about. And aside from him, we do see a couple other bigger characters. We see Captain America with a picture of Norman. We don't actually see him in the show, but he's talked about quite a bit. And another thing I really like is the way Spider-Man talks about Cap. Makes it very clear that for this version, he's a big Captain America fan, not a big Iron Man fan. Which, as you guys know, I like Iron Man more than Cap. But I much prefer Cap being the inspiration to Spider-Man than Iron Man. It just makes a lot more sense to me. So this Spider-Man very much is giving me the vibe of if he were to take part in the Civil War, he would have been on Team Cap. Which, again, I gotta be real with you guys, that's just something I prefer. I prefer Spidey being a big fan of Cap than Iron Man. It just, for me, it makes a little more sense for him. Even though I love Iron Man more than Cap, like I just said, between Cap and Iron Man's personalities, it just makes a lot more sense for Spidey to fawn over Cap instead of Tony. That being said, I did love when Tony actually showed up in this show, it was only for one scene, and we see a few pictures of him just on TVs and whatnot, so we see what the armor looks like, but it was really nice to see him in the show when he apprehends Otto. So, that being said, I still loved seeing him. And then, of course, my favorite Marvel character appearance in this show would definitely have to be Daredevil. The entire fight scene between him and Spidey on the top of Oscorp, especially when you first see him and it plays the Daredevil theme, I just thought was awesome. Especially because I'm currently rewatching the show now to prepare for Born Again coming out, and I just loved hearing the music. I loved that it was Charlie Cox who actually voiced him, and the entire fight was really great. And then seeing him again at the end of the episode when they showed that one of the interns was working for him, which they hinted at in that same episode where we first see Daredevil, but it's nice to see that he's probably going to end up coming back, and Charlie Cox's Daredevil can do no wrong, so I will never complain about seeing him in anything, even if it's She-Hulk. But that being said, I loved seeing all of these guest characters. And then a few of the other minor things I want to talk about is just the action scenes. I think all of the action in the show was really good, borderline amazing. This is really where the animation shines for me. There were a couple fight scenes where it looked a little janky, mostly with just the frames per second. But that being said, I really had so much fun with all the action, with seeing everything moving so fast, especially with a character like Spider-Man. It just looked so dynamic, I guess you could say. And I think this is definitely where the animation shines, is in the fight scenes. Even if the regular Peter Parker stuff is good when the characters are pretty stagnant, when they're moving around as fast is really where it has very, very interesting to watch. And then one of the last things I do want to talk about is a very minor thing, but it's something that I've done in basically all of my other reviews, so I feel like I have to talk about it now with the suits. I really like how this show kind of has an evolution of him going from his homemade suit to the classic red and blue. Because we start him off in a homemade suit, which I actually think looks really good for a homemade suit. And then the more you go through the show, once you hit episode 4, is when we start going through some of these different costume changes, which I really like. The 3 costumes they chose were the 3 costumes that Peter used in the comics when he had to kind of quit being Spider-Man, because if I remember the storyline correctly, I believe he was accused of killing somebody, so he had to use different costumes to still keep helping people, but he couldn't use a Spider-Man costume, so he used Dusk, Prodigy, and the Hornet. So I like that those were 3 of the suits used here as kind of a reference to that, but also at the same time just making for a really funny scene. And then at the very end, when we get a spin on the Future Foundation suit, which I didn't think I was going to like it at first because of some of the minor changes they make, but seeing it in motion, I really enjoyed it. And then of course, in the last 2 episodes, when we see that classic red and blue suit, it looks so good. And I'm glad it wasn't just saved for a final episode like a lot of the MCU TV shows do. Granted, this was the last 2 episodes, but I was glad we got to see a decent enough of it where I felt satisfied with everything that we saw of the suit, and it makes me excited for the next 2 seasons, with getting to see this suit a little bit more, unless they change it a little bit. However, with the next season, it does still have me very excited to not only see this suit, but they also tease that he's going to be getting a new suit, because when they put the symbiote back through the portal, a little bit of the symbiote still stuck through and stayed in that lab, which Norman finds, teasing that we are going to get a Venom storyline in the next season, which I am very excited for. And before I get my final score, there actually is one thing I want to mention that really caught me off guard with the last episode, when you see May in a prison, and I watched all these episodes once by myself and another time with Luke. The last 2 episodes I have only watched once because I was able to watch them with Luke beforehand. So I will probably actually rewatch those episodes after this. I meant to do it before, but I really wanted to get a jump on filming this. But we were caught off guard because when we see May in that prison and we're thinking, who is she going to see? And then we hear this voice. And me and Luke automatically recognize it as Josh Keaton. And then when it pans back and it shows that it's Richard Parker, is such an interesting idea to not only have Richard Parker still be alive, but in prison. And I think having Josh Keaton voice him is a brilliant idea, because it feels like it's a passing of the mantle of sorts. Granted, I know Spectacular was not the last Spider-Man show to come out, but in my eyes, it was the last good one. And I grew up on Ultimate Spider-Man, but I'm sorry, that Ultimate is not the greatest Spider-Man show of all time. But that being said, getting back to what I was talking about before, having Josh Keaton voice Peter's dad, which had me thinking at first where he was going to be, because I think this morning or yesterday, he tweeted about the show and just said something along the lines of, I wonder what's going to happen. And it had a bunch of us going, when he does stuff like this, that usually means he's in it, so where is he going to be in this? And I completely forgot about it before watching the episodes, so when that scene happened, I was completely caught off guard. But it's just, yet again, another thing that has me really excited for Season 2. So, aside from that, there are a bunch of other things I could talk about with this show, but I don't want to make this too long of a video, and I kind of want to leave everything else for you guys to see for yourself. That being said, when getting to my final score on this show, I really loved this show. I was pretty excited beforehand, especially when I saw the trailers, and I know not a lot of people are loving this show. That being said, I personally am. I just had such a fun time with every episode I watched, so much so that I did not mind watching all the episodes twice, and it was just something that I just had so much fun with, especially coming off of What If. I know I haven't done any reviews for What If, but I know in some tier lists I did say some of my thoughts on primarily the first season, which I loved the first season of What If, but then the second season really dropped the ball, and then season 3 completely dropped the ball to where I hate all of What If now. So I really need something good for Marvel Studios in terms of an animated show. Even though I haven't seen X-Men 97 yet, I'm holding off on watching that until I watch the original 90s show, or watch all of it. I've seen 2 seasons. That being said, I really did not want them to mess this show up because I love Spider-Man so much. And they definitely did not mess it up, at least in my opinion. I don't know how many people are going to agree with me on what I'm about to say, but for me, I genuinely have to give this show a 9.5 out of 10. There were no characters I didn't like. There were really no stories I didn't like aside from the origin, but they even made me like that more in the final episode. Honestly, if the final episode didn't do that, I probably would have had this at a 9, but because this explained the first half of the episode and the origin aspects, it made me appreciate it more even if I don't love it. This show would be a 10 if it was just an origin that I liked a little bit better, and if the animation were just a little better. I think if it was just a little more fluent, I would have liked it more. I'm still going to stick as a 9.5. Granted, I did just finish the show, so there could very well be some recency bias, but that being said, I really don't think that's going to change, though. The lowest this show will go is a 9, but this has me just so excited for future seasons, where for me to be this excited about the future of this version of Spider-Man, I think really kind of solidifies how much I love this show. And I really just can't recommend this show enough. If you're thinking about giving it a shot, but you're not certain on it, I definitely recommend you do. I really don't think you'll be disappointed. And even if you are disappointed, that's fine too. Again, I just form your own opinion on it. If you're interested by it, at least give it a shot. Whether you like it or not, that's completely fine. That's your opinion. But if you have seen it, please feel free to let me know what you thought of the show down below in the comments. If you're agreeing with me and how much you liked, or if you didn't like it. And if you didn't like it, I'd love to know what you think. Let's just keep everything respectful in the comments, no dismissing of other people's opinions. And yeah, that being said, that's all I've got to say. So thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for more reviews in the future and other type of videos, and I'll see you guys next time. See you, webheads!